Hey everyone, Yen Zhao. After a 1 year hiatus, Doug Ernst is back.
Nice.
Previously, you saw him for Soulfinder Demon Match, and now he's back to talk about his new book, Soulfinder Black Tide.
Hey, man, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Oh, glad to have you back. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, the time has flown by. Like with the pandemic, it was really weird. It was simultaneous. It was paradoxically like it went forever, but then it was also really fast at the same time. But we're finally here, and we got another book out, so I'm happy.
I can't believe we're still in it. But so let's bring it. Oh, nope, that's not the right one. There we go. Okay. Let's talk about it real quick. So all of our main characters are back. You've got Father Redder, Father Crane, and Detective Chua. So tell us about Black Tide.
Sure. So Demon's Match was sort of a character-driven story. It was the origin of Father Redder and him sort of accepting his path, the path that God wanted him to go on in terms of becoming a soul finder despite his reservations. Soulfinder Black Tide is more about expanding the sort of soul finder universe, and this is a more plot-driven tale that seeks to establish these three men as a team moving forward. So there's plans for the series that I have in terms of all these three men, this character William Neville, and some various demons. We were going someplace with this, but I really wanted to just tell this sort of big adventure tale, but also let everyone know that these three men are a team.
And to me, it's kind of an interesting team because you have two priests, and then you have sort of the one lone guy who's sort of drawn into it. Now, usually in books, someone like Detective Chua would be like the sort of the foil. He's the reason for exposition. So he'd be like, but Father Redder, what does this mean? And then he would give you an info dump or something. But I like how he's more of an active participant in the story.
Mm-hmm.
He's not sort of like the extra.
Right. I didn't want him to be an extra in any sense. He's lacking when it comes to the spiritual realm, and he doesn't even have the authority that the priests are given through the church to perform exorcisms. But at the same time, I wanted to show that physically he is willing to put his body on the line, and he is very much a hard charging type of guy who wants to do the right thing, who wants to be a virtuous man, and he wants to help out in any capacity that he can, knowing that the priests are up against both evil, spiritual evil, and physical evil, whether it's occultist Navy SEALs or occultist former nuclear submariners or whatever it is. He feels as though he has something to contribute to the team.
So let's come back to that in a minute. But for the moment, you are selling this directly through Iconic Comics. You decided to go away from the crowdfunding either on Indiegogo or Kickstarter model. So why don't you run us through the Iconic page where people can buy the book?
Sure. So when you go to iconiccomics.com, there'll be a number of different books there. Right now, it sort of leads with both the Dave Dorman cover of Black Tide, the Matt Weldon cover. Then there's the option to either buy rosaries that are linked to the story or inspired by Soulfinder, either by themselves or in a combo pack. The rosaries are obviously limited. They're made by Rugged Rosaries, a very good company down in Texas. And then obviously works by Timothy Lim, Matt Weldon, Bill Williams, Mark Pellegrini, Brett R. Smith, all those guys that I guess people associate us all together at this point in time as a little network of friends or whatever you want to call us. All our work is sort of consolidated in one place. And so right now we have a quote unquote early bird special. One, because it's early, but two, my soft covers, as people know by now, are being reprinted. The synopsis page and credit page on the inside front cover was not there. You need your credits page. The synopsis,
Definitely.
not so much, but I want the credits page there. And so does my colorist, like Brett R. Smith and Wes
Absolutely.
Hartman contributed. So those got to be all done over again. Not at my expense, thankfully, but they will be redone eventually.
And currently, it looks like it's on sale for $25.
Correct.
Oh, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, so this particular tale, as you mentioned, it has the normal story, the 56-page story. Then it also has just the inks, a black and white version of the story, essentially, which I know you asked about that in your previous video. I'm happy to talk about that. It's got a number of bonus pages. It has art by Vince R. Rush, who has done work for Soulfinder since Demons Match, and I like him. He's a really good dude. And then a section called "quote unquote" script talk, where I kind of explain my thought process in terms of the script writing process and what I was trying to do with Black Tide.
Yeah, I found each of those sections very interesting. I especially think for anyone who's interested in making comics, this is actually a good book, even if you're not necessarily into the subject matter. This is a good book to have because for the most part, you don't get to see the whole process. I mean, the only thing you really could have added extra would have been, like pencils and layouts. But I think the inks are enough. And one thing that I almost never see is a breakdown of a script. Like, how should a script look? If I'm going to give my script to an artist, how should it be laid out so that they can interpret it the way I want it? And it's nice to actually see that in there.
Yeah, there's been people that have asked me since Demons Match, both if I could review their script or go over it or be a script doctor, or just asking me questions about how to write a script. And so I sort of learned, I've said before, Demons Match, I wrote the first draft in many ways like a film script. And then Tim and Mark got back to me and they're like, this is for film, basically. This is not really a comic script. So it's good, but you got to tweak it here. So I made those changes and I made it in a way that Tim was comfortable with. Then on Black Tide, I basically did the same thing. And I gave it to Matt, and Matt was like, good to go. I like it. Let's do this. And so that was ready. So I was like, okay, I'll put that in there. But then also, like I said, explain. I wasn't sure how people would react to the story because I wanted to be able to tell a self-contained tale, but also I wanted it to plant the seeds to be able to go both forward and backwards in time to tell Father Crane's origin tale, a Father Crane's story or stories from the 1980s, and then forward in time to deal with this William Neville because he is not going to stop with the occult. And if you don't stop, you're going to have the same problem, if not worse, in the future. So I was worried about how people would respond to this, also because it was a plot-driven tale, and it was in many ways kind of different from Demons Match. So it was like if they're expecting Demons Match over again, this little intimate tale, one-on-one between Redder and somebody that he's trying to get these demons to leave alone, then they were not going to get that, and I was not sure how people would respond.
I don't know. I mean, I think this is the way that you kind of had to go. I'm not a big fan of redoing the same story over and over. I think it needs to progress. And this is sort of like the next level for Father Redder. And through his, sort of working his way up the ladder to become, well, I guess he was already an exorcist, but to become like a soul finder, a more competent soul finder. We got to see his progression where he's, learning the ropes, maybe doesn't quite get it 100%, keeps going up. But at the same time, we have the other two characters around him, and we get to see their development and how that increases as well.
Yeah, that was something I tried to do. And also, for instance, if people read Demons Match, they would see that in the first book, he is easily, or maybe not easily, but he is swayed or he's fooled by the demon's illusions of his father, and it scares him and it shakes him. In this one, there's another illusion that he gets it much more quickly, but he's still kind of thrown off just long enough to have something happen to him, or the demons to take advantage of while he's in the quote-unquote abyss. But you can see that he's a little bit more wiser now. He's not falling for the same tricks. And then there's another instance where in the first book, he strikes a match because he wants to see his deceased father one more time, or he's kind of lured by that. That's him falling to a temptation. And then Father Crane prays over him to help bring him out of that particular spiritual realm. In this book, it kind of comes full circle, and he actually ends up having to pray over his mentor to help his mentor come out of the abyss. And so there's these things that I wanted to either come full circle or show that there's some sort of progression with the character.
Well, I think you definitely succeeded, and you know, it's interesting because when you have like that initial, okay, we got to set the story like you did in Demon Match. Sometimes you don't necessarily always get to see how big of a scope things are going to be. You got to keep it kind of small and develop the character. But I do think in this one, you definitely see like, oh, wait, this could go this way, that could go that way. And almost like, I don't know if a larger world is quite the right term, but it does seem, you know, when you're fighting an ancient demon, but it does seem like it's opening up a little bit more, and you can start to see like, oh, wait, maybe it's not just directly this one demon. Maybe there's other pieces in play.
Right. So Blackfire is the demon that's at the top of the hierarchy of and he has all of his underlings, just like angels have their hierarchy, then demons have theirs as well. So ultimately it'll be Blackfire, and he's the puppet master of all these other demons that are under him. And so I would like to eventually tell these tales that involve many demons all at once, and Father Redder and Father Crane and Detective Chua coming up against a situation that they have not been in before, and raising the stakes to a very high level.
You know, and one thing I was wondering too, so I think most people are familiar with comics more from superhero comics. So in this story, the two priests, they are sort of like superheroes in that they have powers, even though it's not powers of themselves, it's powers that God gives them basically. But how do you avoid the Superman problem? Like, DC has progressively ruined Superman to the point where his powers do pretty much anything that it's needed to do to function with the story. And so he's really, in most writers' hands, he's not very compelling. And I've seen the same problem in, I remember in the 80s, different Christian comic books. It was always like, oh, they're up against this big scary thing. God says go away, and then it goes away. It's pretty anticlimactic. So as a writer, how do you sort of ratchet up the tension, but yet not have it fall flat when you're talking about issues of, you know, most people would say like, well, God is the ultimate. He's obviously much more powerful than the devil. So how do you work that from a writing standpoint?
Yeah, it's difficult because as I was talking with Timothy Lim and actually some other people offline about, you have a situation where it's basically like a Deus ex machina that could essentially choose to save you. And so that is going to happen when you have these priests who they don't have superpowers. They're again, their authority comes through the church to perform these exorcisms, but ultimately it's up to God to decide how and when to act upon these demons to stop them or whatnot. So if you have those situations, to me, it's like, okay, well, I need to have different forms of heroism throughout the story. So Chua is one where he, as I said on another stream, he literally has to save Crane from the ship as it's going down. If he does not show that heroism in that moment, Crane dies in his cabin. He's unconscious already. He's been unconscious for hours. And so he never even gets to the end, to the climax. And if he's not there, then maybe the Black Mass happens. Then Chua has to look over this guy in this roiling sort of ocean they've got storms going on, and he's in the middle of nowhere with this priest. He's got to hold on to him. He's got to keep him. Then, so there's that. Then in the end, he literally throws his body in front of this demonic being or whatever the Black Mass is going on. If he doesn't throw his body in front to save Redder, Redder gets hit probably in the head, gets knocked out. He never even gets to say that prayer to begin with. And so that shows to me just how important Shua is to the entire story. But then
Definitely.
So then you have to also be able to show the psychological mettle of these characters. You have to put them in situations where you definitely care about what's going on with them. So when they finally do get to that point, yes, ultimately a prayer of some sort is going to be answered, but there has to be this dance, this psychological and spiritual dance that makes it fun and entertaining for the reader, but also makes sense. And from a theological point of view, from a Catholic point of view, I want everything to be right. So I don't want it to just be, if somebody comes across thinking like Redder is Superman, like it's like, no, you're missing the point of the story. It's on some level, actually, I'm trying to say that, okay, sometimes if you're in the abyss, if you're at the lowest of the low points, sometimes the only answer is a spiritual answer. Sometimes the answer is prayer, and that's what you need. So these characters, every time they're in the abyss, they pray. When they are at the lowest point, when they're in complete darkness, they turn towards prayer. And even at the end, pseudo spoiler, Redder's in a situation where physically there is no way that he would have been able to handle this being by himself. And especially if it's underwater and his ally is underwater and it's stronger than him, it's able to take bullets. So the message from a theological point of view is sometimes you need to just turn to God and and hopefully it is God's will, or that you will accept God's will, whatever it is. Maybe Redder's prayer would not have been answered and Crane would have died. But then that would have been a whole other story to tell about why was God's will to not answer that prayer in that moment. And I would have been tasked with telling that tale in an interesting way that made sense to the reader.
Sure. I don't know. Maybe there's a previous Soulfinder that happened to.
Right.
Out of curiosity, one thing I was wondering. So Father Redder is Soulfinder 79, right?
Correct.
So is the 79 sort of like a current serial number, or is it just like 79 over the past 2,000 years?
Right. So one of the things that I wanted to make clear is, so because you need to have combat experience and be a priest and be an exorcist. Obviously, priests can perform exorcisms, but each diocese essentially has like their guy who is like an exorcist, and the bishop gives him permission with each case or whatever you want to call it to perform these exorcisms. But so that would be a very, very small number of priests who fit the bill for this. And so initially, and I've joked around about this, people have asked me like, why did you pick 79? Well, one, it's a very small number, and I wanted to emphasize that. Two, I was born in 1979, so I'm sort of, I have a affinity for the number 79. So that's also the reason. But obviously in the book, Father Crane is 77. So there's this space that people have now picked up on. Who is Soulfinder 78? And will you tell that story? And so I'm glad they did, because the answer is yes. I want to tell that story of who Soulfinder 78 is, his connection to Father Crane, his connection to William Neville, and how all of that plays together in this story. So long story short, there are very few Soulfinders in U.S. history, and right now, Redder is number 79. I could fool around a little bit about global history and how they're identified in other parts of the world, but at least for the United States, Redder is the 79th Soulfinder in U.S. history.
All right. I can see that. Yeah, I was kind of wondering, because I was thinking like, well, after World War II, there had to have been a lot of people in World War I. And if you go back further, like the Crusades,
right.
It's like, 79, that's a pretty low number. But okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, no, I have wiggle room to fool around with it. So the entire history isn't completely mapped out. It's not some sort of Tolkien-esque thing where I have the entire world. And I know Timothy Lim and Mark Pellegrini are great. They basically have their own little story Bibles where they know everything. And I've always been of the mindset where I know a certain amount of I have a good number of details. So if you ask me about Father Redder's childhood, I could give you certain details here or there, but I couldn't give you like ages 1 through 21 exactly what happened to him. But the general trajectory of his life and maybe like major life events I can tell, or major sort of issues that about the Soulfinders and the history of it. But sometimes people want a level of detail that I would not be able to give them with a full-time job.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just like to say, as a reader, thank you for not just making it like every issue is going to be one of the 7 deadly sins.
No,
I just can't take those stories anymore.
For me, the first story, I was like, okay, I'm telling a story about these priests. I know that they're going to be people who are maybe hostile towards the Catholic Church or religion in general. And so I wanted to confront a serious question about why bad things happen to bad people. That always comes up about kids with cancer or parents with cancer or people with leukemia, whatever. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to confront one of the hardest questions that keeps being asked over and over again. So that was the first one. And then the second one, I like to address these sort of almost universal questions. And this one has to deal with despair, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, and just sort of the general, I don't know, the weight of that and the ability of that to pull people down into the depths of sorrow and how to get out of that. And what are the effects of somebody who actually gives into sorrow and despair and basically dissolves into the ocean of despair.
Yeah, and that really comes through in this book. And I'm glad, like you were talking about in Demon Match, you sort of see Father Redder, sort of his longing for his father and, his connection to his family. But I like that this one, even though there might be a little bit of overlap, this is primarily different in that I think despair and the loneliness is something that a lot of people feel in the world these days, especially with this past year and all the craziness that's been going on. I'm kind of curious. Have you ever seen the TV show Evil?
I have not, no.
Oh my God, that's the show for you. It's, well, it came out in 2019. There's supposed to be another season coming, but it's a story about, I guess you could say the main character is sort of a psychologist. She does profile workup for the court, to see if someone's criminally insane or what issues they have. But she meets a guy who's in training to become a priest, and she gets fired from her job. He hires her because his job is for the church to evaluate people to see if they're really possessed or if it's a mental issue, and to help to try to verify or disprove miracles and prophecies. And but the really interesting thing is, in the second episode, they talk about like all the steps that you have to go through to become possessed from a Catholic point of view. Like in most modern media, it's like you're in a dark house and you meet a demon, and then the demon like soul rapes you, and then you're possessed.
Right.
Whereas you're like a swimsuit. But the Catholic version is much slower, and every single time you're making that choice to let it in. And the entire first season is about people's choices, especially this psychologist. It's like her descent into potentially becoming possessed. At the end of the first season, we don't know exactly, but there's a whole lot of crazy stuff going on. Highly recommended. It's on Netflix.
That was something that both in Demon's Match and this particular story, I wanted to stress that possession is something that takes place over the course of decades. So Demon's Match had the Limax, which was this sort of slug-like character demon in who, they're very slow, and it possessed this elderly couple over the course of many, many, many decades. So that's what I was trying to get at, is this is something very incremental, decision by decision, lie by lie, little tiny lie by little tiny lie, where you slowly over the course of time align yourself, your will, with evil. And then obviously with Black Tide, William Nebel is a former nuclear submariner who he's been around since the 80s. And so that was one where sometimes people, they want, how do I say it, decades worth of characterization smashed into this 156-page tale. And I'm like, no, I want to tell another 56-page tale, which is the man who first gave himself into despair, who first started going down that road. And then you can see in Black Tide the end result of a man who is given himself to despair. He's quote unquote drop in the ocean of despair now, and he's about to be totally consumed. And then in the future story that I want to tell with him, then I want to tell this tale where love and despair sort of clash, and what happens when somebody who sort of embodies pure Christ-like love, a Father Crane, comes up against somebody who almost is trying their hardest to run away from love and into the hands of despair. What happens then?
Yeah, and I really like it. Let's say at one point in the book you mention, if someone, let's say, turns their back on the path that leads them to possession, if you turn around again, it's going to be a lot worse.
Right. It's so this particular tale in the epilogue, I'm trying not to give too much away, essentially, so biblically, there's a passage. I'm sorry, I'm not like the guy who can just like rattle off every single verse or whatever. But essentially, there's this passage where it says like, okay, the demon leaves its quote unquote home or its house, or it gets cast out. But if this person does not change their ways, if they continue to live in sin, if they continue to be a drug addict or addicted to sexual things or whatever the heck it is, then the demon comes back, but the demon's going to bring all of its buddies with. And then you're going to have an instance where it takes up residence in the house with 7 other demons. And then you have a real big problem on your hands.
Definitely.
So that's where we're going eventually with William Nebel. Hint, hint.
And so how long do you see the Soulfinder series going? I mean, not that you have to necessarily give a definite answer, but are we still sort of in the beginning and there's many years to come? Or you're like, well, Father Redder story, beginning, middle, 3-act story type thing? Or have you decided yet?
I mean, I love Father Redder as a character, and I think there's a lot of potential for him. One, because he's still being mentored by Father Crane. So until he actually comes into his own, then afterwards, there's the stories of him actually having to mentor somebody else. Like I said, you could go to Father Crane's past, which I am going to do. So I want to tell his Vietnam roots, his origin in Vietnam, and there's a tentative title for that. I'll tell you off the air if you want. So I have Father Crane stories planned, at least 2, his origin, and then the 80s story with William Nebel, or the pursuit of him the first time, as the Pentagon's keeping him in the dark about what exactly is going on. There's the story that I'm writing now, Volume 3, which takes place in a sort of fictional nation that's like Nepal, and it's got a K2 type mountain there and a drug cartel. And then a future story, the one-on-one showdown between William Nebel and Father Crane. And then there's another story that I would like to tell with Father Redder somewhere in there, if I could. And then I have patrons who are like, I want you to tell a Civil War era Soulfinder tale. I want you to tell a World War I tale or World War II. And so there's that. And then there's another IP that I'm working on. I had to stop because of the script for this next Soulfinder, but it is tied to the Soulfinder universe. It's hard to explain, but there is a Korean War veteran who, I guess this is a spoiler now for anyone that watches this, so that when he shows up, you'll know that he is a Soulfinder, but he is within that universe. But the tale is not about him, but people that know about Soulfinder will recognize his outfit immediately. And so there are tales that I could tell with him as well. He might even show up in the 80s story, I'm thinking. So we'll see.
So I do have a kind of a question, though. So with the Iconic company, Iconic Comics company, that is primarily Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini's company?
No, Tim actually does not own it. Mark does not own it.
Oh,
Tim knows the owners of Iconic, but he does not run it. So
okay,
it's a situation where he's obviously very friendly with them and they know each other, but ultimately the guy who runs it, it's his own thing and he makes his own decision. So sometimes people have already like approached me with questions about Iconic and how to get in with Iconic. We'll just put it that way. And it's like, listen, that I don't own it. Tim doesn't own it. And he makes his own decisions. So you could reach out to Iconic. There's only so much that I can say, and I don't want to get in a situation where I'm trying to influence in a strange way what the owners do with that particular website. That's the best way I could put it. So sometimes there's awkward situations with creators and people that want to know the details, but no, Tim does not own Iconic Comics.
Oh, interesting. So then the Soulfinder universe and Camden America, Black Ops, those are separate universes, comic universes, or do they sort of exist in a shared space?
I would say they exist in a shared space. Okay. I have to be careful how I word that. So I've said before that Soulfinder Demons Match would not exist without Timothy Lim. And so I'm forever grateful to Tim for that. And I have always said, if Tim wants to use Father Redder or any of the characters, any of the Soulfinders, then he has a blank check to do whatever the heck he wants with Father Redder, because I trust him and I trust Mark Pellegrini. So if they want to use him, great. If they don't, that's fine. I would never force Tim to use Father Redder. But there's actually people that read Common America, they can see the main character sometimes wears a Steepleton shirt as well. And so that is a little hat tip to Steepleton, Maryland, where Father Redder is located.
So how much temptation do you think Father Redder would have hanging out with the girls from the Tim Lim universe? Because I'm looking at the Christmas card right now that came out with, I think it was Common America 2. And I'm just saying, you know.
I think he would be okay. But if asked, he would probably acknowledge that they are very beautiful women. But he would not be tempted into I don't know, any sort of lustful situations over Tim's characters. But he would acknowledge that they are very beautiful women.
Okay. So essentially he would be a good wingman for Chua.
I think so. Yeah. So Chua would definitely probably he's a single man at the moment, and he's full of testosterone, and so I think he would be very open toward dating one of Tim's superheroes.
Okay. Well, hint, hint. Little
so Tim, if you want to set that up at any point in time.
All right. So, you mentioned the day job. For anyone who doesn't know, you are would a newspaper man be the right title, or reporter?
So I wear a lot of different hats at the Washington Times. So sometimes I'm doing editorial stuff. Sometimes I'm doing social media things. Every so often I'll interview someone. I've mentioned before that I loved interviewing Mike Rowe and I loved interviewing Gary Sinise. There was a couple other really cool interviews that for bizarre reasons fell through at the very last minute. I was supposed to interview Billy Corgan once a long time ago, and that fell through because he does veteran stuff as well. And so that was all set up. And then like the guy in the management, I'm like outing him right now. I'm not Billy. I don't blame Billy. I blame the manager guy or whatever. at the last second, he was like, Billy's busy. You can't do it. And I was like, what? I prepared for this interview for hours and hours to ask these questions. What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, you know how things go, man. You know how. And I was like, no, I don't know how things go. You gave me your word that I would be able to interview him, and now you're telling me I can't. No, I don't. And then he's like, man, this happens all the time. And then I like copied he made some comment about my boss, and then I copied my boss on the reply to basically be like, my boss is going to take my side over you, dude. But I really wanted to interview Billy Corgan, and that one fell through. But aside from that, I'm also covering breaking news. I'm just doing all sorts of stuff. Whatever they want me to do, I will do. And that tends to keep me employed.
So of all the work that you've done, and of course you can decline to answer the question, which do you consider the most important? Not necessarily the most successful in terms of views or critical praise or financial income, but what do you consider the most important work that you've done?
Yeah, it's really tough because at each point in my life, I thought that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing at that point in time. Although in hindsight, as time goes on, you can see like maybe that was true, but I wasn't doing it to the best of my ability because my mind was clouded, either because I was not in a state of grace. I'm getting Catholic-y here on you, or I was living in a state of mortal sin or whatnot. And so I could have done things a lot better. But these days, I feel as though my job at the paper, it's almost like it's not even my real job. It's funding my real job, which is the stories, the Soulfinder stories at this point, because that's my creative outlet. That's what I've always loved, is storytelling. And so my job at the paper allowed me to fund Black Tide and to forego Indiegogo and forego Kickstarter. And so when I see people that are sharing the stories with their sons or daughters, or if I get a letter from a pastor, or I get a letter from a deacon or a priest, or I get a letter or DM from someone who's like, you know what, I fell away from the church from a long time, but for whatever reason, I was reading these books and I'm now going to get confirmed or whatever, or I'm going back to mass for the first time in years. If you believe in an eternal soul, an eternal soul, and that you believe that you've done something to bring somebody some degrees closer towards God and the good and the true and the beautiful, then it's hard for me to conclude otherwise that this is what I should be doing. And this is far more important in many respects than just whatever news story of the day. Although when I'm writing a news story, I'm trying to tell the truth. And if you are telling the truth, then that's a good thing as well. And you're educating people. They're able to be better consumers, both of news and just make better decisions in terms of how they conduct themselves in civil society. So, I mean, I'm sorry if that's a roundabout answer, but no. It's really humbling to me when somebody says something to the effect that I have had a positive impact on their eternal soul. And I'm sure there are critics out there who would say the exact opposite, but I'm trying my best to be a good ambassador for my faith and to practice what I preach.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned truth too, because for me, people always want to know what's good art, what's bad art. I always think that it must have a reflection of the truth. And to the degree that that reflection is accurate, I think it's going to show how enduring and how powerful and long-lasting the story will be. And it seems like a lot of modern, well, let's just look at the big two. Who's buying those books? Nobody.
Right.
Because nothing is true anymore. It used to be about people who have these fantastical powers and they can control your mind and fly and blow up planets and stuff. But, it was always like a human dilemma of, how do I use these powers? Am I doing the right thing? Which I don't know what happened, but it just disappeared. And to me, that's why those books have really fallen by the wayside, except for a very niche audience. So to me, any sort of good art, not just in the newspaper, but in fiction as well, it's got to have that essence of truth to it, or people are just going to be like, eh.
Yeah, it's one of those things I was telling somebody earlier today where you have these writers and these artists, they don't even believe there are such
Mhm.
things as objective moral truths. And so if you don't even believe in good or evil, it's all relative, then how do you even write a story about a superhero? Like it's not going to add up, or you're just going to tell these forgettable tales that are just nothing. That's why you have these comic books where essentially I've said before that it's like Seinfeld, but they have capes, and
Yep.
but it's not even Seinfeld because they're often just talking about mundane, stupid, ridiculous things that are meaningless. And you're like, this says more about the writer and what's going on with the writer
Sure.
than it does about anything else.
Yeah, and well, I think part of it is, they've never cared about the history of comics, so they've never really been exposed to these classic themes. There's absolutely no difference in the classic stories that we've had in the last 100 years and what we hear, in the Trojan War and all these great epics throughout history. It's all kind of the same stuff, just with a little bit more modern flavor. So when you flip it and you're talking about, like, where's the best place for brunch or something, like, how can you compare one with the other?
Right. And I obviously did not pick up this issue of Captain America, but there's a panel, or I saw like Red Skull is now some sort of weirdo blogger that is an
Yes.
allegory for Jordan B. Peterson or something along those lines. And it's one of these things where it's always just low hanging fruit, partisan, political claptrap. And we're just going to take our little stupid low blows in and zings at people. And it's like you've gone from the Red Skull being the
Mhm.
embodiment of evil, this sort of Darth Vader-esque figure, to a blogger. Are you serious? How do you even, as a writer, how can you look yourself in the mirror and say that you're doing readers any sort of service? It's a disservice, and you're doing. I would not. There's no amount of money you could pay me to be telling Captain America tales where Red Skull is nothing more than a petty blogger. I would be like, I can't do this. I have to. No, I would rather pick a job. My old school I used to work at Target many years ago on the overnight shift, the planogram.
Mhm.
I would rather go back to Target in a heartbeat than get paid $1 million to write Red Skull blogger tales. And I know people probably don't believe that, but no, I would just want to jump out a window if you tried to tell me for a year I had to write Red Skull blogger Captain America.
See, this is the one point where I sort of have to disagree with people. Um, they think it's fantastic because to them, Jordan B. Peterson is Satan, and they live in such a bubble that when they write this stuff, all like 400 of their readers agree with it. And that's what you can see happened is they've whittled that industry down so far that the only people left are the ones who agree. So of course, to them, when they're getting feedback, it's just a few crazies on the internet who disagree, and the people, who spend whatever they spend, or they get it for free, when the stores are going to throw it out or whatever. Those people actually believe this stuff. It's kind of like, a few years ago with the whole Me Too thing. It came out of Hollywood, right? Well, of course it did, because they're trying to. There's a term, casting couch, right?
Right.
Like in the insurance industry, there's no term like, well, I'm taking Janice to the copy room, right? It doesn't
Right.
exist because that's so rare. Not to say it doesn't exist at all, but it's a given that you should be doing these things in Hollywood in order to advance your career. So when they call out, they see this stuff everywhere. It's like, well, it is everywhere in your industry, in the world that
Exactly.
you've created. And that's sort of how I see, for me, I've completely given up on Marvel and DC. As far as I'm concerned, everything that happened in the X-Men universe after Claremont left is just fanfic. And it's degraded to the point where people with no talent haven't read good stuff, so there's nothing to inspire them. All the people that they write for, all like 50 of them, because there's clearly not anybody buying most of these books. They honestly believe that stuff. They decided, well, we want to switch our audience from the average person to this tiny little audience, and they got it. They got their wish.
Right. They have a tiny audience of people that want activists posing or masquerading as serious writers, and they're all a bunch of people. Essentially they live on cable news, across the board, whether it's Fox, CNN, MSNBC, whatever it is. I believe if you only just watch cable news all day, every day, or those sorts of that is unhealthy for you. And so these people live where they view every single thing through a political spectrum, whether from the right or the left, and their minds just become warped because they only see people in terms and their actions in terms of politics. They cannot even conceive that somebody would act in a way that is not like some sort of bizarre calculus in terms of forwarding a political agenda. And it's like, what happened to you? Who raised you in such a way where you cannot even conceive of someone being charitable to you just for the sake of being charitable?
Sure. And they don't even realize when they're writing things that don't make sense to the average person. Like, did you by any chance watch WandaVision?
I did not. I canceled my Disney Plus subscription and I did not see it. No, but I heard good things about it, including by people that I respect.
Well, the middle was good. But in the end, spoilers. It turns out Wanda enslaved a town of like 3,000 people. And there was a military guy who was trying to kill her because she was enslaving people. And there was this whole big battle, and they made it seem like she was the hero at the end. And it's like, no, she was the villain. She was absolutely the villain. And I think the people who made it didn't realize that. The military commander who wanted to blow her up, he was totally the right guy. Like, yes, if someone has, I don't know, if you get like a David Koresh or something where you've got people mind controlled, yes, you have to arrest them. You have to stop them. So I don't know. I mean, if they eventually make her a villain, then okay, I'm kind of on board. But I don't think they realize that.
Yeah, there was I was speaking off the air to you about Word on Fire, and the CEO, Father Steve Greneau, he actually recently covered WandaVision, and he was saying something very similar to you, where a lot of these messages that were embedded into the show, he was like, I don't think the writers actually knew what they were projecting in terms of the lessons to the audience. I think some of the lessons, which were very interesting, they almost stumbled upon those lessons. And that's another one of those things where if you have people that they don't care about virtue, they don't know about virtue, they don't know about truth, they don't care about truth, sometimes they're actually going to randomly say things that are quite intriguing, but they don't even understand how intriguing the subjects that they're addressing are.
Sure. It reminds me of I don't know if you ever saw that She-Hulk issue where there was a woman who, I guess she was sexually harassed at work. They never explained what it was. And so as Jennifer Walters, she represents the victim. In the end, the cops are taking this guy out to, I guess, jail in the paddy wagon. She-Hulk, stands in front of the paddy wagon, stopping it from moving. The two cops driving it are knocked out. She rips open the doors where the white business guy, is sitting in the back, and she lets that lady in to beat him up. And this is considered virtue for a superhero. Like, oh my God, do you know what you're writing? Do you understand how this works?
Yeah, I remember people talking about that particular scene, and it's like, oh, I guess the rule of law is not something that remotely even the heroes even care about. It used to be a thing where it's like, okay, where the system fails, where people fall through the cracks, the heroes would then jump into action and then rationalize, like, okay, well, the rule of law is not working here, so I'm going to proactively take steps.
Uh-huh.
But if the law actually works and then the process is working and then you circumvent that to just do your own thing and do vigilante
Yes.
justice, then it's like, okay, well, we're going down a kind of strange road here.
The complete unthinking of the morality of it, and then even the consequences. So She-Hulk is an officer of the court. Certainly, she's going to be disbarred, and also she led to the damage that caused 2 cops to be knocked out. That's for sure assault at the minimum. Why would she not be arrested after this? So it's like no morality and no sense of consequences for actions.
Yeah, I was telling someone else recently that a lot of times in these books, especially when it comes to some of the feminist stuff, they really only care about
Mhm.
the stories are about projecting power and my ability to project power and assert it over you. Whether or not I'm right or wrong doesn't matter. It's just about giving a woman power that then she could wield as she sees fit. She is judge, jury, and executioner, and that is supposed to be celebrated. Just the fact that a woman can do what she wants, when she wants, how she wants to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you think they do it like on the down low, like She-Hulk is going to distract the guards, like take selfies with them or something, and the lady can sneak in the back and beat the guy up. But nope, we're going to do this out in the open. So it's, I don't know, and I could see the MCU starting to come down. There's all sorts of issues with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and all the people who canceled after the Gina Carano thing. I don't know. It's not looking good for entertainment in America.
Yeah, I didn't see I heard that in Falcon Winter Soldier that he was denied a home loan or something along those lines. I don't know if that's actually the case or not, but I was like, oh man, they can't resist they have to find a way to shoehorn these things into the stories. And that's the sort of stuff that turns me off. And I'm just like, really? Do you always have to find a way to just insert politics into it in a ham-fisted way? Like, I can't do it.
Yeah, and the worst thing is like they had excuses for it. So they said it was because he was gone in the blip and he didn't have a credit rating for those years. And it's like, but he works for the Avengers. There's no way Tony Stark wouldn't have set up like an endowment to pay those guys.
Right.
He knows not all those guys are independently wealthy. And then in the second episode, they're walking on the street and the cops come up, and then Sam Wilson sort of gets into it with the cops, like, oh, you're stopping me because I'm black type of thing. Well, the thing is, what they didn't say is the cops knew who Bucky Barnes was, and they were looking for him. So it totally makes sense that they would be like, oh, who's this guy with the wanted fugitive? But they never actually said that. So it's just weird how they want to I don't know, keep bringing it up like that.
Yeah, and if you call these people out on how certain scenes are either illogical or forced, then they get mad at you. Then you're the bad guy for pointing out that this is actually subpar writing.
And I mean, I think really that's a lot of the problem with modern American media. If you look at what's going on, go to any bookstore, you've got like a half of a shelf for American graphic novels. You've got an entire wall for manga. You've got K-pop. There are a lot of people who are very influenced by music that they can't even understand, as opposed to most American stuff. And I got a feeling, well, Netflix and Amazon are kind of in the right place at the right time, but I got a feeling Americans are going to start watching a lot more foreign movies soon. People don't like reading subtitles, but there's just not a whole lot that's good going on right now. So how do you see the whole, I guess, entertainment industry, if you want to focus in on comics, or really what's going on in comics is sort of like the canary in the coal mine of the whole industry, in my point of view. But where do you see things going?
Yeah, it's one of those things where there are very few shows over the past few years that I've actually made time for. I used to, years ago, I would love seeing all sorts of movies. I loved all the different TV shows. I made time for them. And obviously I'm a different person now than I was back then. But part of it is, again, all of this sort of bizarre partisan politics. So Law and Order is one of those shows where they would like pull the stories from the headlines and then like quickly write them for the season. And so whatever was going on in the headlines, and you would know that they would do some cheesy Law and Order episode of that. And now it feels like that's what everybody is watching Colbert on late night and Jimmy Kimmel, and then they're taking like script notes from Jimmy Kimmel and writing a script based on that. And you're like, this is bad. Why are you doing this? And it's because they don't read good books. They're not concerned about big picture sort of issues. They're only concerned about what affects them in any given moment. And as a result, you just have forgettable films and forgettable television shows. I watched Tenet was the last movie that I saw. And the last show that I made time for was on Netflix, and it was the last season of Stranger Things. And then before that was the Daredevil Netflix series. I liked that.
Yeah.
But since then, there's very few things because I don't like getting sucker punched 3 episodes into something where, again, it's they're searching for Bucky, but then they're going to turn it into some sort of bizarre race thing to finger wag the audience and let them know, like, you're kind of sort of a bad person if you don't agree with me.
Yeah, and it just makes me wonder how much longer is this going to last, and is it sustainable? You know, we saw political correctness late 80s, early 90s, but even at that time we had shows like Married with Children, which were on and sort of pushing back against it. But I don't see any Married with Children's right now, with the exception of indie comics.
Right. I'm obviously biased, but I think indie comics is a great place to be with people who are not scared about saying whatever they want to say. And they're willing to literally put up their own money to tell stories that maybe might offend certain people, but they're just doing their best to tell good stories and provide people with good art. And sometimes everybody's going to fall on their face from time to time. But every once in a while, you're going to get a gem here or there that you just wouldn't get from Hollywood because they're interested in just churning out. A lot of times they don't even have original ideas. They just keep recycling the old stuff over and over again. Sure. And then today they're recycling old stuff, but then it's with just, again, political propaganda that they saw in the nightly news 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy we're past that election now, but I don't know. We're in a very strange time. Let's put it that way.
Definitely agree with you on that one.
All right. Well, I know you've had a busy day. I don't want to take up any more of your time than necessary. Any final thoughts on Soulfinder?
No, I just want to say if people are looking for a good book, Soulfinder Black Tide is out right now. I would suggest reading Demon's Match first. You don't need to, but it's highly recommended. And I'm always looking for feedback, whether it's good or bad or whatever it is. I'm trying to essentially get better with each outing. I'm trying to learn something with each book and not make the same mistakes twice. So that way I'll just keep getting better.
All right. So Doug, thank you very much. Everyone, if you like the video, click like, subscribe. Tomorrow night, John Hervey is coming back. He's got a new Black Tiger book he's promoting. So again, Doug, thanks a lot for coming by, and everyone else, have a good night.
See you.